Bé, bon dia a tothom. Moltes gràcies per ser aquí avui. Benvinguts i benvingudes a la conferència d'obertura del cicle, el tercer cicle de l'Observatori d'Ètica en la Intel·ligència Artificial de Catalunya. L'acte anirà de la següent manera. Primer donarem la benvinguda a través del nostre vicerrector de projectes estratègics i internacionalització, el professor Josep Calbó. Després m'adreçaré a vosaltres amb una breu introducció sintètica de què és aquest cicle, de què va aquest cicle, quina és la seva temàtica i què és el que volem entomar. I després presentaré el nostre convidat d'avui, el professor Coeckelbergh de la Universitat de Viena. Per tant, sense més dilació, benvinguts i benvingudes i professor Josep Calbó, vicerrector, endavant.
Bé, gràcies Albert, gràcies. Bon dia, reitero la benvinguda que l'Albert ja us ha donat, benvinguts a l'inici d'aquest cicle, sobretot benvinguts i benvingudes als que veniu de fora de Girona, tots sou benvinguts, els que sou de la casa també no us faltaria, però sobretot els que veniu de fora per participar d'aquesta primera xerrada d'aquest cicle de seminaris de l'OEIAC. Jo crec que la majoria dels que esteu aquí ja ho sabeu, però no està de més repetir-ho i recordar-ho, que estem aquí en bona part, o en molta part, perquè fa 4 anys ja, ben bons, la Universitat, els que sou d'aquí de la casa ho sabeu, vam decidir entre tots que orientaríem el nostre futur, d'alguna forma orientaríem la nostra universitat cap a la suma d'intel·ligències. Vam dir-ho d'aquesta manera, vam dir que la Universitat de Girona s'orientarà cap a la suma d'intel·ligències i vam explicar que això volia dir moltes coses, volia dir que ja fa 4 anys ja érem conscients de l'emergència de la intel·ligència artificial, però com érem conscients que era una emergència, era una tecnologia que s'havia d'aprofitar en tot allò que té de bo i s'havia de regular i mirar bé en tot allò que pot tenir de no tan bo, diguéssim. I per tant parlàvem, en el projecte de pla estratègic de la suma d'intel·ligències, parlàvem d'això, de la necessitat de sumar la tecnologia amb el coneixement, diguéssim, humanístic, sumar les disciplines, intercanviar coneixements, sumar aliances. O sigui, la paraula sumar és la que més destaquem d'aquest projecte de pla estratègic, en definitiva, de reconèixer que hi ha intel·ligència artificial, segurament, però és molt important la intel·ligència natural, la humana, la intel·ligència col·lectiva, la que entre tots fem emergir quan ens posem a treballar conjuntament, sobretot des de disciplines diferents i des d'àmbits diferents. Aquest és el resum ràpid d'aquest projecte, d'aquesta gran visió o orientació que volem anar donant a la UDG i que ho anem fent a la mida que puguem a poc, ho anem fent. Entremig hi ha hagut, evidentment, els anys de la pandèmia, que vulguis que no han significat frenades a moltes coses, però continuem. En tot cas, un dels fruits del projecte de la suma d'intel·ligències, de la divisió estratègica de la suma d'intel·ligències, una de les concrecions és el fet que la UDG aculli l'Observatori d'Ètica en Intel·ligència Artificial de Catalunya. Ara ho comentàvem amb l'Albert i amb el nostre professor convidat, amb en Marc, que era destacable que un ens, diguéssim, que dona cobertura i que està vinculat també a l'estratègia Catalunya AI, a l'estratègia catalana d'intel·ligència artificial, s'ubiqui a Girona, i s'ubiqui a la Universitat de Girona. Això és prou rellevant, això també va ser gràcies a que quan vam explicar i vam compartir el nostre pla estratègic amb les persones que portaven en aquell moment també l'estratègia d'intel·ligència artificial de Catalunya, vam veure que sí, que la part ètica i social de la intel·ligència artificial era una de les potes de l'estratègia i que encaixaria molt bé amb la nostra visió de la UDG i que, per tant, l'Observatori d'Ètica vindria o s'ubicaria aquí a Girona, treballant, evidentment, per tot Catalunya i treballant com una peça més d'aquesta estratègia catalana de la intel·ligència artificial. Bé, dit això, com per situar-vos, si algú no ho sabia, diguéssim, on estem o per què estem aquí, només felicitar-nos també, o felicitar en particular a les persones de l'Observatori, l'Albert i el seu equip, que ja estiguem en el tercer cicle de seminaris. Ja se n'han fet 2 amb èxit important. Jo crec que totes, no sé si totes les xerrades estan gravades i estan en YouTube, per tant, encara es poden veure i val la pena, moltes d'elles seguir-les si no les heu vistes. I estem al tercer cicle, i això vol dir que l'OEIAC, en 2 anys i mig, ha fet una feina molt important, el document de posicionament, la plataforma aquesta d'avaluació i aquests seminaris divulgatius, però amb nivell i amb aprofundiment que ha anat preparant. En aquesta ocasió, al voltant de la intel·ligència artificial i l'antropocè, que també és molt oportú per moltes coses. Jo també ho dic, i ara ho dic a nivell personal, quan em va dir el títol del seminari, dic, ostres, Albert, m'encanta, perquè jo explico això de l'antropocè als meus estudiants del màster de canvi ambiental, ho intento explicar, i sé que és una paraula polèmica, sé que als geòlegs no els agrada, però si més no, parlar de l'antropocè és parlar de l'impacte de la humanitat, de l'espècie Homo sapiens al nostre entorn, a la Terra. I per tant, ens agradi o més no la paraula, està clar que és el reconeixement de que l'espècie humana està tenint un impacte molt important al planeta i com segurament la intel·ligència artificial tindrà un impacte en l'espècie humana i per tant també en el planeta. I per tant, vincular-ho tot en aquest tercer cicle de seminaris ho vaig trobar molt encertat, més quan aquest any, o aquest curs, també a la UDG, diguéssim, l'ha dedicat una mica més especialment, una mica més intensitat a temes de sostenibilitat ambiental. Vam inaugurar el curs amb una conferència sobre sostenibilitat ambiental, estem desplegant el pla d'ambientalització, etc. Per tant, també és molt oportú per l'UDG, és molt oportú pels reptes actuals de Catalunya i en general de la humanitat, tant el repte ambiental com el repte tecnològic, diguéssim, exemplificat per la intel·ligència artificial, però també per la UDG. Per tant, res més. Gràcies a tots els que heu vingut. Segur que la conferència serà molt interessant. Gràcies, Albert, per organitzar-ho. Thank you, Professor Coeckelbergh, for being here with us. I res més. Torno la paraula a l'Albert, que us presentarà un poquet la xerrada d'avui i espero que seguiu assistint a la resta de xerrades o seminaris d'aquest cicle. Gràcies. Bon dia.
Moltes gràcies per aquestes paraules introductòries i de benvinguda, vicerector Calbó. L'OEIAC té l'honor enguany d'iniciar el tercer cicle de seminaris de forma presencial. Els precedents van ser molt telemàtics. Si recordeu, estàvem en una situació en la qual la gran majoria de les coses que fèiem, no només des de l'Observatori, també des de la Universitat de Girona, eren molt virtuals, però aquesta vegada ho fem de forma molt presencial. Això té avantatges i desavantatges, evidentment. I ho fem en aquest espai, en la sala de graus Pep Nadal a la Facultat de Lletres, amb el nostre convidat i professor Marc Coeckelbergh, catedràtic de Filosofia dels Mitjans i de la Tecnologia a la Universitat de Viena, qui pronunciarà avui la conferència d'obertura AI for Climate, Using Political Philosophy to Reflect on the Political Challenges. Aquesta és una conferència d'obertura d'aquest nou cicle de l'Observatori, de l'OEIAC, que s'emmarca, com heu pogut escoltar ara, en un tema que es pot considerar central tant a escala local com a escala global: la implicació amb la sostenibilitat de l'antropocè a la intel·ligència artificial. Sabem que l'antropocè és un període complex, marcat principalment per l'impacte dels humans sobre el canvi climàtic i la destrucció d'hàbitats, que ens demostra la importància de pensar de manera crítica i acurada sobre tres elements interdependents: els límits planetaris, la vulnerabilitat i l'agència humana. Mentre l'antropocè avança sense pausa, tenim els sistemes d'intel·ligència artificial que acceleren la influència humana, el que suposa que molt probablement definirà el camí futur de l'antropocè en una mesura considerable. I és clar, ho pot fer d'una manera negativa o positiva, segurament ho farà de les dues maneres. De moment sabem que aquelles persones que estudien l'estratigrafia, poden ser geòlegs, però poden ser altres persones també, trobaran noves proves d'emissions de gasos d'efecte hivernacle produïdes a gran escala pels humans, radionúclids del planeta a partir de proves d'armes nuclears, centenars de tones mètriques de plàstic produïdes anualment i prou formigó per cobrir la superfície del planeta. No podem assegurar que la IA no sigui un element més d'aquesta estratigrafia. No en va, en el darrer i prestigiós informe AI Index Report de la Universitat de Stanford, s'apunta que l'ús de la intel·ligència artificial i els centres de dades necessaris impliquen un alt consum d'energia, emissions de gasos d'efecte hivernacle, consum d'aigua i un ús desmesurat de materials escassos associats amb la producció, ús i vida útil dels dispositius i infraestructura informàtica. Així doncs, si bé els sistemes d'intel·ligència artificial es poden utilitzar per optimitzar els recursos en general i el consum d'energia en particular, també cal tenir en compte els seus impactes no desitjats, tant en termes ambientals com en termes socials. És evident que la intel·ligència artificial com l'antropocè, han entrat en la consciència col·lectiva, en la consciència més pública, i són conceptes útils en els quals emmarcar la justícia, també la climàtica. Però també ens fan reflexionar sobre si tots els éssers humans són igualment responsables dels danys derivats de l'antropocè a la intel·ligència artificial. Per tal d'aportar algunes respostes, i és clar, per obrir encara moltes més preguntes sobre la implicació amb la sostenibilitat a través de la intel·ligència artificial, avui tenim amb nosaltres el professor Marc Coeckelbergh. Professor Coeckelbergh is Professor of Philosophy of Media and Technology at the Department of Philosophy at the University of Vienna since 2015, where he was the Vice Dean of the Faculty of Philosophy and Education until 2020. He is also professor at the Institute of Philosophy in the Czech Academy of Sciences in Prague and visiting professor at the Wallenberg Artificial Intelligence, Autonomous Systems and Software Program for Humanities and Society, and at Uppsala University. From 2014 to 2019, he was also professor of Technology and Social Responsibility at the Center for Computing and Social Responsibility at the Montfort University in the United Kingdom. He's a former president of the Society for Philosophy and Technology and a member of the high-level expert group in artificial intelligence of the European Commission, as well as a member of the Technical Committee of Experts of the Foundation for Responsible Robotics. He is involved in several projects, research projects that are very important, including in the area of robotics, such as Perseo, and has collaborated in projects or in past projects such as DREAM, InBots, or the Siena project. He's a prolific author and writer, publishing more than a dozen books recently, including AI Ethics in 2020, Introduction to Philosophy of Technology in 2021, or Green Leviathan of the Poetics of Political Liberty in 2021 as well. More recently, he has published 3 very important books. One is Self-Improvement, Technologies of the Soul in the Age of Artificial Intelligence, Robot Ethics, and finally, The Political Philosophy of AI, an introduction. So thank you very much for being here with us today to kick off the seminar series of the Observatory for Ethics in Artificial Intelligence. Without any more delay, Marc Coeckelbergh, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Albert, for your kind introduction. Thank you also for leadership of university to be present here at this occasion. And welcome to all of you. I'm very looking forward also to meet you afterwards. I would like to talk today about AI and climate and put this in a political context where I then as a philosopher use the tools that we have, concepts, in this case from political philosophy, to think about this. So let me first introduce the topic. Of course, as you know, climate change is one of the most threatening and urgent global challenges we face, not only at a national level, but also at a global level. And so it's of course, a very important theme, and many disciplines in our universities can contribute to understanding what is going on and to also contribute to solution, ideally. So I think it's also a very good theme for this area of thinking about how to make artificial intelligence more ethical, more sustainable, and more politically responsible. And yeah, it's not difficult to see that climate change itself is already a political issue. We have, of course, activism in this political activism in this area, or not only Greta Thunberg, but also other activists have put this, helped to put this on the agenda. And I would say nowadays the theme is quite mainstream. Everyone says that they care about climate change. They want to do something about it. Also in organizations, you know, that they want to contribute to solving the problem. The question, though, is what needs to be changed, and what do I have to do? What does my organization have to do? What does my country have to do, and so on? That is a more difficult question. It's also a kind of a topic that remains always in the media, that also remains very difficult politically at a global level. It's very difficult to reach climate agreements, for example. This shows to me not only something about climate change or how we think about that, but a lot about how we organize our politics. We tend to organize politics mainly at a national and local level, and the global level is a kind of under-institutionalized, politically speaking, for dealing with the global problems that we have. And so this is something that I think also in political philosophy needs to be put on the table as a topic, like how can we change the institutions we have at global level for the governance of climate change. I think that's an important thing if we really want change, if we're serious about wanting to deal with this crisis. Interesting also from a political philosophical point of view is that one of the issues that come up there at a global level is one of justice. A question who has to do what and who is responsible for what's happening. I will come back to that soon. What I can contribute from my side is that I've been thinking about technology for 25 years, and so I try to look at these problems through the lens of philosophy of technology. Thinking about technology, understanding how technology shapes our world, and evaluating also this, thinking about how should technology do things, what do we want, what kind of technology do we need, and so this is the normative questions that come up then. So I would like to look at this, and then we get to technology, to artificial intelligence, which is very powerful technology today. The last years, through machine learning, particularly deep learning, this technology has made a lot of progress, and especially has been also applied to many domains now. And this is really changing things. There are new possibilities, new opportunities, but also problems. Some of these problems come to us in the form of stories. Artificial intelligence is technology and science, but it's also about the narratives we tell about it. For example, some people think that AI is going to take over the world, that it's going to be super intelligence. So this is just one particular narrative, but a narrative that is not just there in fiction, but that also shapes how scientists see themselves, how people who develop the technology see themselves. Some of them really want to develop, for example, this general artificial intelligence. So this is important to keep in mind also from a humanities point of view. When we have a big global problem like climate change, I think, of course, technology can and should be part of the solution. But I will argue now that it's part of the solution, but also part of the problem, and this creates a space where we need to I think, have the overview, where we need to better understand what's going on. So first of all, AI is for sure part of the solution. Yeah? It can help mitigating climate change. We can gather and process data on temperature change and carbon emissions. We can see the patterns in this data with the help of AI. AI, of course, can help to predict also climate change itself, including also extreme weather events that are seen as indications of climate change. So this is, of course, very important for people living in a particular region that is prone to flooding, for example. It's extremely useful tool to have artificial intelligence to try to predict what's going on there. The effects of the weather, what could happen, can also be predicted. Then the energy consumption, we can consume energy in a more smart way. We can use AI to predict what the needs will be. So in terms of the management of energy and responsible management of energy, this is also important. AI can also help to process data on endangered species. So if you care about the environment, you can say, like, okay, this can be a tool to help us see what's going on in terms of extinction, for example. Also in terms of deforestation that's happening, we can monitor that, we can gather data, and again, this can also be modeled, there can be predictions. So AI is useful for that. We can also think about how to produce less carbon emissions and make technology more efficient, and for this purpose, again, use all kinds of smart technologies, including AI. Monitoring, using AI in agriculture, all kind of smart solutions, but also maybe some forms of geoengineering. This is more controversial. For example, when you try to put substances in the air to block the sunlight. So we can talk about all that kind of solutions, but there is also one direction for solutions which I'm particularly interested in, and that is the possibility that we use AI and digital technologies to influence behavior, influence consumer behavior, influence the behavior of people to try to make it more environmentally friendly. Now, that is also partly what I will talk about today, because this is also ethically and politically problematic. But it's definitely a possibility. So why is AI part of a problem? Well, as many of you might already know, that of course AI also uses energy and creates its own emissions. And if we have today these large language models, for example, there was a figure in 2019, I think 300 ton, 5 times the amount produced by an average car over its lifetime, just for training the algorithm. Last year, 2022, ChatGPT used 500 ton, produced 500 ton of emissions, CO2 emissions. So these technologies, typically we think of software and data as something that is not very material, that is clean also, right? Our screens look so clean, our computers look so clean, but in fact, of course, all this ICT technology is also has environmental impact. So energy use and emissions is only one aspect of that. There's also the devices that need to be produced, the infrastructure that's there, for example, data centers. And of course, AI also is used to help fossil fuel companies do their thing. So if that's problematic, then AI is again not so positive there. So yeah, and often I think there's this lack of awareness of all these aspects. Fossil fuels somehow in our minds, we still connect so much with industrial production. We think about smoke coming out of chimneys, but there is of course also all these aspects related to ICT. It's important to think about that. It's also important to look at the ethical aspects of AI. I think the narratives that are currently there today often depict AI as something evil. It's not evil, it's not a big problem, but there are some ethical issues raised by AI that need to be dealt with. And so that's the privacy and data protection, which we also have in other areas, but also everything that comes along with automation. Once you automate things with the help of AI, you also have to ask, like, well, who is responsible then if something goes wrong once you automate? And I also asked the question in my research, to whom are you responsible? So who are the stakeholders? Who is affected by this? And of course, if AI is used more and more in our daily lives, we are all affected to some extent. We are all stakeholders. So this makes it also into a more political issue. There's also explainability. So if you normally to be responsible as a company, as a person, you have to be held accountable, meaning often that you have to be able to explain to people why you do something or why you did something. And when you use a technology that works in such a way that you cannot really explain how it came to a certain recommendation, and you base your decision on that recommendation, there's a problem there. For example, in the juridical sphere, if you use AI to decide if someone should be let out of prison or not, but you cannot explain to that person why you made that decision, that is a moral and legal problem. The same with credit scoring, for example. So if you are in a bank and you give credit to people, but you cannot explain why the algorithm decided that you don't get credit, for example. So these are all kind of problems you find more in AI ethics. I would like to focus today more on the political side of these problems and on political concepts, in particular freedom and justice, that are challenges once we use AI. And then I would like to go back to the problem of climate change, how this relates to that. So in my book, The Political Philosophy of AI, I take a number of political principles which I believe are impacted by AI. Freedom is one of them, because I said, like, if we want to change something about climate change, and generally if we want to have a more environmentally friendly ways of living, then we of course have to change our ways of living. And so one approach to that is saying, like, well, individuals have to change how they live. They have to buy in a different way. They have to behave in a different way. And there are two ways of doing that. One is coercion. So you can have a law and you can just simply forbid plastics, for example, or you can have police walking around and saying, like, you're fining someone who doesn't do something environmentally right. This is like the very traditional way of doing things. Now, interestingly, there is also another way of doing things that can also involve AI, not necessarily, but that doesn't take away the negative freedom, as we say in political philosophy, but that influences human choices in ways that are subconscious. So, for example, you enter a supermarket and you went to the supermarket to buy an apple because you want to eat fruits and you also think it's healthy to eat fruits. However, when you come to the checkout, there is chocolate. And you end up buying the apple and the chocolate. This was not your plan. It was not your autonomous choice, one could say. You didn't reason about it or anything. It was influenced by the very design of the shop. And that's nudging. You're changing the decision environment. You're not coercing people, but you're doing that. Now, this can also be done, this kind of influencing can also be done, first of all, with digital technologies. Think about Amazon. If you go and look for my book, AI Ethics, maybe the algorithm says, people who bought AI Ethics also bought the political philosophy of AI, right? Just to give a neutral example, a random example. So this would be, of course, again, a way to try to influence behavior. But in that case, one could say it's a good way of... and of course, for environment, we can do the same. We can say, let's nudge people into more environmental... Instead of forbidding things, I personally hate forbidding things. I think it's, for autonomous adults, it's not a good approach. But let's influence people's behavior. For example, in the case of the health issue, one can put fruit at the checkout. In the case of environmental behavior, one can, for example, make plastic more expensive, or make it more difficult to gain, offer different kind of bags, for example. So there's all kind of ways what this can be done. And also with digital technologies, including AI, we can profile people and we can manipulate people, right? Now, so from this perspective, it sounds good. So from a macro perspective, imagine you're a policymaker and you want to change the behavior of people in a particular country or a particular, even a particular context like a university. That's really attractive. But it's also morally and politically problematic at the same time, Because what you're doing is that, you're using a form of covert manipulation. Often people don't know that they are manipulated. That's the whole idea. And you're not really respecting people as autonomous individuals who can make their own choices and think about, is this good for me, is this good for the planet, and so on. So that's a problem, I think, right? So that you don't take seriously people as autonomous beings, as adults also, and that creates a kind of tension between these two directions. Because if you don't nudge people and you don't coerce at all, so you don't have regulation and everything, then you get a society like in the US, for example, so libertarian society, everyone does what they want, and you will not reach your climate goals, for example, not at local level, not at global level, forget about it. But if you use nudging and perhaps some forms of coercion in the sense of some laws that forbid certain things, some people say, for example, we should forbid private jets to some extent, or so there are all kind of things that can be done, but then you might reach your goals, but you might reach them in a way that infringes upon human freedom and autonomy. So this is, I think, as a political philosopher, I cannot decide for you or for society, but I can show this tension. And of course, in the history of philosophy, some people have argued that we need to coerce. For example, Hobbes said, like, well, if you just leave people free, you get this nasty and brutish state where people fight with one another. You need to have a Leviathan, kind of the state as a kind of monster that's a necessary evil in order to keep the peace. And one could say for the environment, well, to save the planet, why don't we have some kind of global government that forces people to be more environmentally friendly, to be more climate friendly, and so on. So this is something I will talk about more towards the end when I go into my book, Green Leviathan. But I think it's good to see this kind of tension that there is at the individual level already versus freedom and reaching climate goals. But the problem is not only at the individual level, but it's also at the collective level in terms of justice. Because if we look at climate change, in a planet, not everyone is equally vulnerable to climate change. For example, if you live on a Pacific island that can be flooded, and the climate change makes that there are more floods, more extreme weather events, or people living in regions with droughts, it's clear that these people are more vulnerable to climate change. And at the same time, other people might contribute more to creating these effects. Also, combined with social and economic instability, so other factors, economic factors also, it could be that some people are more resilient against climate change than others. And we all know that we in the West are generally more resilient, our societies, also because of social and economic reasons. So AI can even help to render these vulnerabilities more visible. So there's this kind of interesting mixes in my book, Human Being at Risk. I also talked a bit about that, between the natural and environmental on the one hand, and the social and political on the other hand, which makes that there is no such thing like pure natural vulnerability or pure political vulnerability. Here, nature and the social meet to create certain vulnerabilities, and then the question is how do we deal with that? Because it looks like a question of justice. If some people produce more problematic effects of climate change and others have more the problems. Also, knowledge is not shared equally, and then it's of course what's very known in environmental ethics. There's an intergenerational justice problem. If these generations create problem, but other generations are supposed to deal with it, that also sounds unfair and unjust. So we have all these differences, which are politically relevant in terms of justice, and even the impact of climate measures might mean that some people sacrifice more than others. So you have a whole field of differences that translate into questions of justice. And yeah, these kind of problems have already been indicated long time ago, and yeah, still also for climate change are very, very relevant today, but haven't been addressed. So what does that mean for AI and climate change then, is that we can have all kind of technological interventions that can be proposed. But I think these should be assessed not only in terms of the effect on individuals, like is individual privacy dealt with, is responsibility ascribed, and so on, but it should also be politically assessed in terms of the effects on different communities, different countries, different parts of the world, and should be discussed in terms of not only freedom but also justice. And yeah, then we can, I think, have a more fair way of doing things. For example, who should if lifestyle changes are necessary, who should change lifestyle in order to save whom? So I gave the flooding example already. But also nudging, one could also say, like, yeah, so does it mean then that people in the West should be manipulated, nudged towards some behavior, and other people not? Who bears the cost in terms of freedom there also? So it's a very complex issue, I think, all assuming that we really want to do something about climate change. If we don't want to do something about climate change, these problems are not so urgent, of course. Talking about urgency, there is also an interesting issue that yeah, now AI ethics is a big field, a booming field, but sometimes I think, like, yeah, but of course AI is not the only issue that we have in this world. And when I was talking at UNESCO, I was also confronted by this very directly by representatives of for example, African countries saying, like, yeah, we have other problems. Yeah? So you talk about AI, Mr. Coeckelbergh, but we have other problems. We have poverty, we have malaria, we don't have clean water, and so on. So that is also interesting because it's also a very political question always. What should be prioritized? Should AI as a team be prioritized always? And should high-tech always be prioritized? It could be that sometimes low-tech is solutions for certain problems in certain contexts. So this also to give a more political context to the discussion. I think if we don't address this, then you know, someone rightly could say, like, well, you know, you want to control us, or this is neo-colonial, and so on. So I think it's better to specify the problems and to really ask who should deal with the ethical political challenges and how. And if it is the case that some people have more impact on climate change than others, it sounds like it's fair that they carry more responsibility to do something about it. And that doesn't mean that in terms of solutions, that philosophers can have all the answers. For sure not. First of all, we need expertise from the scientists, but also we need, I think, democratic discussion about what all this means, because if we have these tensions between dealing with climate change and freedom, if we have tensions between different generations, different parts of the world, this is something that needs to be dealt with politically and, I think, democratically. So we should discuss about how to deal with that and what it also means for particular countries. For a country like Belgium, Austria, or Spain, what does it mean then? What can we do also to contribute to solving the problem in a more just and freedom-respecting way? Behind my remark about philosophers and that we need democratic discussion is also the idea that you don't only see by some philosophers, but also with some scientists, historically also, that of course, if you have some scientific results and if you have some results of rational thinking as philosophers, then there is a temptation to say like, I have the solution. This is the solution to the problem. But the problem is that that one should always watch out then to not just impose a particular solution on people without discussing it with them. So it's again point like, there can be a tension between truth and democracy, and expertise and democracy. So it's a very difficult problem, and I think climate change also brings that into the open, because you can say, we should listen to the climate scientists, but then what, right? So what to do then? What does it imply then in a particular context, in a particular country, and so on? And I think that it's unavoidable to then see it as a political issue and discuss, who should do what and in a just way. So it's all fine to say technology should lead to greener and more climate-friendly world, but that means that we need to ask the bigger question: what kind of world do we already have? How do we organize our society? And also in education, how can we create structures in higher education, for example, but also other levels of education, to think about these issues in a transdisciplinary way? Because all this, nature and the social, nature and the political, it means that we need to connect the natural science with the also with the humanities and social sciences, in order to better understand first all these problems, for example, these tensions that I talked about in terms of freedom and justice, and then of course also work towards a solution. So for AI, that also means that then if we want AI for climate, which was my main title, then this can only be done in an interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary way, in order to better understand this. Here in this article are some of the things I said today. I'm also working on AI and democracy. As you know, as you heard me talk, I talked a bit already about that we should do things in a democratic way, but of course, that raises all kind of issues. What is the place of knowledge and expertise in our society? What should it be? How can we make sure that citizens have more knowledge, but still form their own beliefs, right? So not the scientist or the philosopher who says, like, this is what you should believe. How can we have deliberative democracy, for example, but still make sure that enough expertise about AI, for example, is part of that? That is, I think, very interesting for also local communities and organizations. I was, in my book, Green Leviathan, very interested in the tension between democracy and climate goals. And that also is a way to say a bit more about this freedom challenge. So this is, I would like to end with just giving a very brief overview of that book. Because what I did was I started from a story about a green Leviathan, right? So an AI that in an authoritarian way governs the earth, and so there chooses the ways of coercion and nudging in order to make sure that we reach the climate goals, right? So there's a thought experiment, philosophers like that. And so it starts with this fiction story, but to bring again this kind of, bring up again this problem that we have this tension. Yeah? I mean, this is extreme, but we have the tension if we really want to deal with it. And in political philosophy, this can also partly be conceptualized with the concept of paternalism, that you say, like, for the good of mankind, we are going to take away your freedom. And this also has, in cultural history, in the history of ideas, has a long line. For example, in Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov novel, there is the Grand Inquisitor who argues that people cannot deal with freedom. It's like, today one could say, like, look what happens if you give people freedom, they mess up the planet. So this is kind of a direction, also utilitarianism, for example, a direction to say, like, from the macro level, it looks perfectly fine to say, like, we have to take away freedom from people, but of course from the other side, it is deeply problematic. So this tension between on the one hand, libertarian freedom, which doesn't solve the problem, and on the other, authoritarian governance, which is itself extremely problematic. That is, I think, a challenge we have in this climate change discussion. I think in Europe, generally, we go in between the horns of the dilemma, right? So we say we have some coercion, we have some regulation, but we still preserve some liberty. But to strike that balance right, and to strike it right in the context of this crisis and this urgency, I think that's a huge challenge, and for that we need to think about that. So yeah, and I think that is the direction we need to go. So I think it's too easy to just say like, yeah, like in the US, let the billionaires solve the problem. We need to think about freedom, and in the book I do that. I think about another notion of freedom that is does respect autonomy, that is about capabilities, and links freedom with democracy. It's a more philosophical Republican kind of view. A view also that tries to be more critical and asks this who question again: who is actually doing what, and who benefits, who suffers, what could happen there, you know? And in political philosophy, of course, there's next to liberal philosophical thinking, there's also Marxist thinking. It's also interesting to look at that and think like, you know, if we would really have a more extreme situation where there's much more effects of climate change on us, what would this mean if some people benefit and some not? Would there be some kind of struggle between climate classes, between some who benefit and suffer? Would there be a rebellion of the climate proletariat? And if we don't want that kind of situation, what can we do about it? Also interesting is to, you know, think about also, especially also in the light of AI. Do we really always need to think only about humans and their ethics and politics, or can we also think about the interest of animals, of non-humans? And of course the discussion about Anthropocene and climate forces us to take the planetary view and to consider at least more relational views that put humans not necessarily in the center. But this is quite a challenge for thinking also, because we are so used to think about the political body, the body politic as a made up of humans, and how to do that, how to integrate non-humans in our politics, or how to take seriously the politics of non-human animals. I think it's a challenge already very conceptually also. But I think the question needs to be asked, and I end with, in an Arendtian way, in the end of the book, to say like, okay, politics is presupposes and is about making a common world, and it looks like in the current situation, when we have this climate crisis and when we also have all these new possibilities and risks related to AI, that we need to think again about what does it mean to make a common world at all kind of levels, including the global one, given these problems and given these new technological possibilities and environmental developments. So that, I think, is a you know, as a philosopher, I ask the questions. I don't have the answers to that, but I think political philosophy and ethics can help to conceptualize what it means to be all in this to be all in this together, and what it means to deal with it in a way that it respects freedom and is just, for example. And finally, I think, yeah, this issue that I already said, like at a global level, we don't really have proper governance structures. There's a supranational element to the European Union, but apart from that, we don't have much at a global level, really. So the question is, how can we move away from this very libertarian situation that there is at a global level, where it's not only each individual, but especially each country more or less that's what they want, right? It's just a contractual thing. Do I sign up to the agreement or not? But how can we do something about that, but still in preserving democracy, right? So we don't want authoritarian world government. So how to do that is a big challenge. So I hope in the talk to have given an overview of some of the problems related to dealing with climate by using AI. And yeah, I didn't go so much into the technical details here. What I did was more to connect it with these wider political, philosophical questions about how we organize things, how we make that common world. And I think that needs to be part of the discussion to address these problems, because otherwise both the dealing with climate change and regulating AI will happen in a way that's politically problematic. So it's good to in this way to make explicit what are the political challenges for us today in the light of climate change and AI. So this was a small contribution to that, and I'm hoping to discuss this with you now and after the talk. Thank you. Excellent, yeah.
Well, time for questions now. I will use this opportunity to kick off the questions, and then I'll pass on the microphone.
Okay.
This is a very somehow provocative talk in a way. Not so much if you do it in a place like this at a university, but it depends on where you go. If you talk about some of these issues, it will probably be thinking you're quite an alarmist. You might be thinking, well, there's so much that we can do with AI that will actually remove some of the biggest problems we have in relation to the issue of sustainability. Mm-hmm. But what is interesting is that we don't see politicians yet talking about in their political manifestos, including these issues in order to convince the voters when it comes to sustainability. So perhaps you could tell us more about why they don't take on board some of these messages that are critically important and that will be perhaps a trade-off between nudging and freedom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, I mean, of course, it's I have to speculate there, but I think it's really a question of still too little awareness how both the power of these technologies, how they are already changing our world, and of course also the awareness about climate change. I do think though that more and more there's political attention to the climate change issue. What I don't see is a sort of that politicians really think about what does it mean then for my voters and for my country and so on, and also the connection between technology and AI is not always made, also not in academia. So that I think I already combine a lot of things that indeed need to still be combined for many people in their heads, so to speak, and so it's a matter of awareness. But I see positive developments towards it. I'm a bit afraid that the AI is always seen in terms of this alarmist story and the story of AI taking over. On the other hand, yeah, it's good, I think, to also look at some of the extreme scenarios to think about the political aspects. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. Time for questions.
Yeah, so I'm Alicia Manuel. Thank you, Mark, because it's been very inspiring conference. Just regarding, you were talking about the narratives supporting AI, and I just wanted to ask you, because I think there is this importance of narrative and how we build the stories around AI, and how these stories make us shape the technology that we have. I think AI, it's very much influenced by sci-fi. Recently I was working on this paper about how to take from other narratives in order to maybe, I don't know, speculate about how can we build better artificial intelligence, or how can we, I don't know, shape new concepts or new problems, and how maybe to move to pivot from maybe things like cyberpunk to, for example, solarpunk, and how that can help. I mean, so the question that I'm trying to articulate is like, how does other narratives can support innovative ideas to create other kinds of technology, maybe dealing with climate, and that doesn't support this idea of technology taking over humans?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. That allows me to elaborate a bit on more about this narrative side, right? So one way to react to the narrative about AI taking over is to say, what scientists often do is to say like, yeah, that's nonsense, and let's look at the science and what AI actually is and so on. But in fact, as you suggest, narratives have influenced how AI is actually developed and how AI is discussed and regulated even. So it is important to look at it, and so the other response is to say like, let's acknowledge that narrative is always connected also with technology, and then let's make better narratives and better technologies. And the second one is of course what I propose and what I wrote about, and it doesn't mean that I have immediately the right answer, but I think from my talk there is some suggestions in what direction it could go, right? To write a narrative that is about also justice, a narrative that is also about preserving freedom, taking people seriously as people who can also think and do not only have to be paternalistically regulated. So I think there's these could be ingredients of a better story for AI in the light of climate change. Yeah. But I think in practice we need to sit together and discuss it and make the stories, right? So and it's not just me, or academia, but I think also citizens and other stakeholders.
Més preguntes? Des d'allà, com vulgueu.
Hello, my name is Jaume Medler. Thank you very much for the conference and for your published work, which has been very inspiring in the past few years. I was very interested about this, the emphasis you put in nudging. Nudging has been here before AI, obviously, and it has been questioning the very concept of free will for some work derived from psychologists. I don't really buy into it, but I would like to ask you two small things about it. One would be whether you consider that using AI with all its capabilities into nudging, it's actually going to change the notion or challenging the notion of free will that we have now, which to me would have tremendous implications for democracy or governance. And the other one, it's coming from the concept of transparency of this technology that I came across in your book, AI Ethics. We might not be there yet, but that's one of the big questions with AI. Is it going to evolve in a way that we don't really understand? And if so, how is that going to question or undermine the political goals or usage of it for nudging that might start at with a, if you want, paternalistic, but with the end sort of justify the means to the point that, well, those are not the ends or the means that we wanted, it's just the Leviathan taking full hold of it. Thanks.
Thank you very much for these questions. To start with the last one, so the whole idea of philosophy of technology is to say that the means are going to influence the ends, and so this is happening with AI. I mean, to say that like it's going to evolve, I always have a problem with that, because it seems it frames AI as something that's autonomous and a kind of deterministic development, and the humans are not involved or something. And the reality is, of course, that humans create AI, and humans can also have some control over what kind of data are used and what happens with this data. So I think it's important there to say that humans have a role and therefore a responsibility. And also responsibility, I think, to make AI as transparent and explainable to some extent, at least, that is technically possible. But also, even if a technical system itself is not completely transparent, one needs to be transparent towards the ones one is responsible to. For example, the politician towards the citizens, right? And regardless of the technical details, that is the main responsibility. And so if you cannot use AI in a way that you can explain to your voters or your citizens why you're doing it, that you're doing it in an ethical way and so on, then you shouldn't use it. So there would be quite strict. For the first part, you mentioned free will and so on. I think the kind of psychology model used there is that we have these two systems or two levels where we have these conscious decisions and slow kind of thinking, and we, at the same time, we also have heuristics, quick ways, but which are subconscious and which are sort of wired into our biological nature. And luckily we have them, because otherwise daily life would be terrible if I have to think an hour, am I thirsty, am I not thirsty, or something like this. So this is, it's good we have these two systems, but the problem is that nudging really targets this one system, and in that way, does not really respect that we have all these other capabilities, and so we should have, so there's a really, for me, a fundamental question whether it's okay to do that, but one could also, I mean, in ethics and politics, there have to be always, there are different values and principles, so one could say maybe taking away some autonomy is okay at certain times, in certain contexts, for certain purposes, because these other values, like survival of humanity or at you know, local goals, are also important. So we have to balance things. So I think it's also good to not think about it in a completely absolutist way. So in a sense, I think some nudging is probably unavoidable, yeah, and we already do it, and it's also good to be aware of it, but it should be justified. And so exactly this kind of reasoning, why do we do it, and explain to people also why it's done, and put limits to it. Like, there should be always limits to power and also limits to manipulation if it is justified at all. So, yeah, this, I mean, this just to map the domain. Yeah.
One more question?
Thank you. Joan Burgess from Philosophy Department.
Ah, great, okay.
It's been very interesting. I mean, from my perspective, you've presented a whole series of problems.
Yes, that's right.
We have in philosophy and AI, and so I guess we are actually aware that you could not go deepening into the subject, but simply for my curiosity to you, which first question would be, when you're talking about justice, you raise the issue of justice, not only ethical issues, but as a political problem, also the issue of justice. What kind of notion of justice do you have here in mind? Either sufficientarianist or a prioritarianist idea of justice, as you apparently suggested, or an egalitarian notion of justice? The idea of equality did not come into the picture at all, so you focused on liberty or freedom and justice, where equality or this would be my first question. A second question is, what's the problem with coercion if we're talking on political? If we are in political field, what's the problem with coercion? We are all coerced, even if we agree with what actually is coercing on us. I mean, law is always a matter of coercion, no matter whether you agree or not with what actually the law demands on you. So the thing is how law and how public goods, which are guaranteed by law, are provided and are accepted by the people as a political community.
Yeah.
So that's the important. And from my perspective, that could be where the focus should be put. How this is again another notion that I didn't see in your picture. I repeat, I guess it wasn't actually your intention, but the idea of public good. I mean, many of today's public goods are imposed upon us. I mean, we all accept.
Absolutely.
That's part of what the definition of what a public good is.
Yeah.
We all accept that, well, we are against pollution. We want air to be there, good air to be breathed. But the means, to guarantee that public good, it's difficult for us to accept that we should do it. So that's why institutions are there to do the job for us. So one might say, well, the climate problem is quite a big problem. It's hard for us to imagine any human being against the kind of policies that should be. So the idea of public good, I think, could bring you closer to what that kind of coercion that we all could agree on, despite the fact that it presupposes some degree of coercion.
Yeah, thank you for your questions. To start with the second one, I think you're totally right that there is already a lot of coercion that we accept, and that's already in place. So there, I would say there's not so much debate about that, although from a political philosophical perspective, one has to also justify these coercions always, because liberty is one of the values. And but we accept them, it's true. The problem with environmental areas is that often we are in a sort of gray zone where there is, where it's more controversial to coerce. So I think we are in this zone, and so therefore we have to have more explicit debates whether it's okay to coerce or not. So that is one thing. With regard to different theories of justice and equality and so on, what I do in the book and what I didn't have time to do here is that I exactly make the argument that these questions raise the problem of justice, but that in the discussion about AI, let alone about climate change, that this discussion about different views of justice is not done, and that we should have that discussion. What kind of theory of justice in academic terms, and what kind of view of justice politically we want to have. And there's all kind of problems with that. So in the book I lay out the different possibilities to think about justice there, and also I note that there can be also there's also this tension between justice and equality. One can have equality but not justice, or one can have justice without equality, and so I basically bring the toolkit of political philosophy and say, hey people, we need to think about this. So it's more a kind of meta intervention rather than a kind of defending a particular view of justice in this discussion. So there's a kind of thing I do, and also in the talk by it's very much overview, but it's also like I sort of specialize in these kind of books in making the connections, in connecting the dots, rather than going in a very small technical area to say like, okay, this theory of justice we need for this problem. But this could also, I could do this in a paper, and I would be very happy to also work on that. But I think my contribution here with this particular work is to rather connect the dots at a more general level, to connect different discussions and problems and map the problems. And then, of course, more detailed work can be done in particular areas. Thanks.
Thank you for the questions. Thank you for the answers. It seems like we have not just a dilemma, but we have dilemmas in context. Mm-hmm. You have briefly mentioned the dilemma in the European context and also in the US context, but not so much in the Chinese or Asian context, mm-hmm. which is completely different if you consider theories of philosophy from that part of the world. and it seems like they're dealing in a very different way. Perhaps you could tell us, maybe very briefly, why didn't you choose to include that element of the dilemma from the Asian perspective, but also why, in a way, especially from the Chinese perspective, they might be dealing with climate change more efficiently than us in the short and in the midterm. And maybe after that we can close the session and get some refreshments and give you a break. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And the second part of the question was going to be my answer to the first part. So basically, so first of all, I do mention it sometimes in writing or in talks, but not today. But I think it's a good way to illustrate the direction towards more coercion and authoritarianism, right? And this also, for the global level, is a problem, right? Because we have all these different political cultures, and there's the libertarian US, there's Europe, there's China, very different approaches. So that's a challenge, and also, but also it illustrates very well that, of course, if you have like 5-year plans, for example, or if you have this state machinery like they have to coerce the behavior, of course you're maybe more effective in dealing with COVID, you're more effective dealing with climate change issues, and I think it's good to, from our perspective, to also see how tempting this could be, right? And so also the danger then of authoritarianism. And it's the temptation is because it is more effective. So I think it's getting in Europe then getting this balance right between preserving freedom and still having in an effective way dealing with climate change. This is really a main challenge I see. And the point is on here, just like political philosophy can help with clarifying the problem. But I don't have the ready solutions to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much again for kicking off the third seminar series of the Observatory for Ethics in Artificial Intelligence. It's been an honor to have you here to do so. And abans que marxeu, dir-vos que, si no estic errat, hauria d'haver-hi alguns refrescos, alguna cosa per picar abans de marxar. I també dir-vos que el proper seminari del cicle anirà a càrrec d'una persona que ens acompanya avui, que és el professor Joaquim Meléndez, i que va precisament sobre un tema relacionat del d'avui, que és com utilitzar els sistemes d'intel·ligència artificial per reduir la nostra petjada de carboni a través de sistemes que són més sobre energia, d'acord? Tractant la part més energètica. Aquest tindrà lloc a la Facultat de Ciències Econòmiques i Empresarials i esteu convidats el dia 29 de juny a 11:15, d'acord? De nou, moltes gràcies per venir avui i per acompanyar-nos. Gràcies.
Thank you for organizing.